The plate hit the tiles with the clean, small sound of something breaking that had been fragile all along. It skittered, spun, and came to rest under the table like a dropped truth. White ceramic, a crescent of tuna salad, a smear of lipstick the color she wore when she wanted to be noticed. I watched it as if I stood outside my own body. The sound reached me late, as if traveling through water. She was standing at the doorway, coat half on, keys in one hand, the other twisted around her phone. Her face was an open ledger of the night, fatigue etched under her eyes, a faint flush on her cheeks, a look I couldn't read and had never learned to read until that moment. "You're a grown man. Make your own dinner," she said, like a clerk reading my sentence aloud. No pause, no softness. The words landed and settled like dust. I laughed because it felt safer to laugh. It came out small, sharp. "Is this, you're leaving?" I asked, and the sound of my voice surprised me. It was softer than the question demanded. She didn't meet my eyes. She shrugged the coat on as if she had been performing the motion for months and only now remembered how the sleeve fit. "No," she said, still not looking. "I'm going out." The keys jingled, a bright, ordinary noise. She kissed my cheek, quick, on the way past, mechanical, as if rehearsed for a TV scene, and left the apartment, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a verdict. I knelt for the plate. The lipstick was smeared across the edge, bold, impossibly red against the white. My stomach turned. I remember thinking, absurdly, that we'd had a glass of this same cheap Merlot only 3 nights ago, and she'd teased me for drinking from the bottle. Tiny betrayals stack. They accumulate until a whole life trembles. Sleep ran away from me that night. My mind kept returning to the lipstick, its color, its careless smear. I replayed the past months like an old film projected wrong side out. Late meetings, she said, were urgent. Laughter down the hallway that stopped when I walked by. Phone screens that flipped away when I entered the room. I told myself nothing, made rational, charitable explanations. She was overworked. She was distracted. She had friends. She was allowed privacy. But an idiotic, stubborn insect of doubt had lodged itself behind my ribs. The next morning I sat at the counter and watched her methodical movements in the kitchen, the way she measured coffee like it was chemistry, the way her hair fell differently when she was thinking. We are creatures of habit. I could read her hands the way others read faces. There was the soft scar on her thumb from a child's kitchen knife years ago. There were laugh lines she made only when she remembered a private joke. I could account for her in increments, the whole of her constructed by small, calculable pieces, and still I felt like an intruder in a house I had helped build. I started looking for tiny things. A receipt under the couch for a restaurant I had never heard of, a Metro card I hadn't seen, a receipt with 2 entries and 1 wine. Each discovery did what a single match does to a pile of dry wood. They caught, small, and then spread heat into my chest. Her explanations were plausible at first. "Work," she said. "Client dinner." Or, "I bumped into Laura from school." She named people with the ease of someone fitting new tiles into an old floor. My questions were tentative at first, light taps that could be answered with a smile, and then heavier, more insistent. She matched them with patience that sometimes looked like pity. "Why are you suddenly asking?" she said once, at the kitchen table, stirring coffee with a spoon that had a nick in the handle. "Have I done something to make you feel this way?" I wanted to tell her everything I had felt in the quiet, the fissure that formed when she laughed at a text and turned her phone face down, the night she claimed to fall asleep on the couch, and the way her hair smelled, not like shampoo but like a cologne, unfamiliar and sharp. Instead, I accused her of the small cruelties. "You can't just walk out and say that," I said, reading the message she left on the last napkin she'd used. The writing was her handwriting, the tight, slalomed letters I had memorized, but the message could have come from an empty room. She said, it was a bad joke, and I wanted to believe her. "You pick at a scab to see how deep it goes." I picked at our life like that, opening a drawer here, checking the back of a bookshelf there, not because I wanted to be cruel but because curiosity and the raw, reckless need for evidence drowned out better judgment. In her sweater, folded over a chair, I found a hotel keycard clipped to the inside pocket, the kind they give out with breakfast like a talisman. The date stamped on the receipt matched the night she had told me she hosted a webinar. The hotel name, a place downtown we'd passed on our way to the river, seemed suddenly obscene. I confronted her that night. The apartment smelled like rain. She was at the sink washing a bowl, water running over her hands, steam fogging the window. The city hummed outside, indifferent. "Who is he?" I asked because it was smaller than the question I wanted to ask. "Where did you go?" She turned the bowl in her hand slowly, as if the answer was in its glaze. Her eyes looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. "We're not," she began. Then stopped. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter like someone bracing before speech. I had the absurd image of her as a diver, poised, and the surface of the water as the truth we were both trying to break. "It's not like that," she said. "But it is like something. There's someone." The confession landed like a second plate. Not a crash this time, more like the gentle ping of something fragile. She said the man's name, Mark. My stomach dropped not because of the name but because it sounded like a normal name, banal and clean, the kind of name you could pluck from an office directory. "His from work," she added. "From before. He's been helping." Helping. I remember her hands, and the way they trembled when she said the word as if it meant lifting, mending, a kindness. "Helping how?" I asked, but my mouth no longer trusted my voice. It had become a tool blunted by panic. She told me bits. Long lunches that weren't lunches. An extra set of keys taken for convenience. Texts that started with concern and slid into familiarity. She spoke like someone naming colors, with economy, with a deliberate avoidance of fireworks. Admission came out in measured pieces, like a story told to children so the scare didn't land too heavy. By the time she sat down across from me, the kettle had gone cold. "You didn't ask me," she said. Her eyes met mine then, not evasive now but raw and open like a wound. "I know. I should have told you. I thought I could stop. I thought I would stop." There are moments when time splits and decisions are manufactured. Maybe if I had been colder, sharper, better prepared, I could have forced her into clearer answers. Instead I felt dismantled. My chest tightened. There was a metallic taste at the back of my tongue. "Did you love him?" I asked because I had to assign the right crime. She flinched, not because of the question but because of the word. "Love is too big," she said. "Maybe I loved a version of myself with him. He remembers me differently." She paused so long I could hear the city breathe. "Do you remember your old camera? The one you couldn't stop talking about when we were 25? He remembers me like we were still in those dark rooms. He sees the me in negatives and prints, and I wanted to be seen like that." I had known her in light and shadow, in the half-remembered silver of college apartments and in the fluorescent honesty of our first jobs. To think that someone else held a photograph of her that I had not known existed felt like theft. How do you guard a person you never knew had been captured by another's lens? Denial is an elastic thing. For a week I stretched it, performing normalcy for both of us. I made coffee, paid the bills, tried to be precise about small domestic things, the recycling day, the grocery list. Those tasks are the scaffolding of married life. Doing them gave me an illusion of control. But at night my ears tuned for the wrong sounds, the clack of a key, the whisper of a text. I started to catalogue the intervals of her out-of-home time like a scientist recording every tremor before an earthquake. Each clue made a mosaic I did not want to complete. A sweater that smelled like another cleaner's perfume. A voicemail erased before I could hear it. A photo she'd kept on her phone, two heads bent together in low light, faces obscured, laughter like a secret. The truth was moving toward me like a slow tide, inevitable and remorseless. One afternoon I called Mark. My hand shook as I dialed. I had no plan, only a need to drag the unknown into the light. He picked up on the third ring. He was patient, his voice even, the kind of voice you expect from someone used to negotiations. "Is this about Anna?" he asked. The ease in his tone was a blade. "You know her," I said because I wanted him to feel the weight of that fact. "You know my wife." There was no defensiveness in him, just a tiredness that matched hers. "I do," he said. "I know her very well." He spoke of small mercies, of listening, of the way she would fall asleep mid-conversation and wake up panicked. He spoke of late-night drives and coffee at 2 a.m., the kind of intimacy that forms when two people share the burden of another's grief. She was losing pieces, he said. She kept misplacing keys, forgetting appointments. She would repeat herself and then apologize without remembering why. I offered to help. It became more complicated. More complicated. The phrase settled between us, soft and dangerous. He said it as if naming a weather condition. She told me things, he said. Mostly things she'd forgotten telling you. I listened until a slow clarity began to form. The betrayal I'd imagined, sleek, malicious, an affair arranged on a bed of lust, was being edged by a different cruelty. I had been betrayed by omission, by erosion. She had not only been stepping into someone else's arms, she had been stepping outside the lines of a life she could no longer fully navigate. The next days were a map of small humiliations. I found a pill bottle tucked inside a novel. The label said "For Memory." I found a note in her handwriting that read, in the patient loops I knew, "If I forget, grind the pepper. Don't forget to lock the door." Her handwriting trembled at the bottom, and my heart lurched at the intimacy of the reminder she had left for herself. I sat alone on the roof one night, a blanket over my knees, the city pricking at the horizon like a bed of stars. Below, our lives were a tapestry of light and motion. Up there, the air was thin. I could have called her, dragged this rawness back inside and tried to stitch it together with explanations and apologies. Instead I let myself feel all the messy, human things. Anger, yes, at the deception and the secrecy, but also an odd, creeping grief not just for what she might have been seeking but for what she might lose. She had been the axis of my days for so long that imagining a life without the steady gravity of her presence was like thinking the world might tilt and stop being round. And yet, even as I mourned, a thread of something harder formed, not just betrayal but the sense that I had been blind. I had loved her on the surface. I had loved the woman who kept lists and remembered anniversaries and told me the same joke until it became ours. I had not known how thin her grip on herself had become. When I woke the next morning there was a note on the pillow. Her handwriting, shaky and deliberate, "I've seen Mark. I will be back tonight. Talk to me when I come. Don't be angry before you hear me out." Underneath, in smaller letters, "If I am someone else tomorrow, forgive me anyway." I read it 3 times and then folded it, placing it like a relic inside my palm. Forgive me anyway. Her plea echoed in me, a plea that blurred my anger and complicated it with fear. I realized then that the betrayal I had suspected was only one face of the thing. The other was the slow, privative theft of a self I had known and perhaps taken for granted. When she walked in that evening she looked like someone who had run a long distance and come home sweating. She sat down on the couch, close enough to touch but distant as if a glass pane had been set between us. Her coat hung limp on the rack. "Mark says you asked him to call," she said. The sentence made a small, hard clack in the air. "Yes," I said. "He told me you were forgetting things." She swallowed. "I know." Her hands moved like an epigram, folding and unfolding into themselves. I didn't want to believe it either. "I have been finding," she stopped, searching for words that seemed to have slipped between her fingers. "There are days I open the fridge and stand there until the light goes off. I get to the office and cannot remember how I got there. I've been leaving things, losing things. The doctor said the tests aren't definitive yet. Early onset, maybe. Or stress. Or nothing." Her laugh was brittle. "That's the problem. There's no clean answer." My anger flared transiently, a hot, animal thing. "And Mark?" She reached for my hand then and squeezed. Her palm was cool. "He remembers a version of me that fits in my bones," she said. "I went to him because he knows the old jokes, the names of songs I used to listen to. Being remembered was like water." The room seemed to tilt. The betrayal sat there, raw and undeniable, but under it was the slow, aching human pull toward recognition and sympathy. I could see, for the first time, that love is not always a single story. It can be a tangle of need and fear and mercy, and sometimes the same act can be a wound for one person and a lifeline for another. That night I dreamed of negatives. Images in black and white where edges were harsh and faces were neither cruel nor kind, merely exposed. I woke before dawn with the weight of something shifting inside me. When I found the journal 3 weeks later, tucked beneath a stack of unpaid bills, the leather cover soft from handling, it was like stumbling into an attic where letters from another life lay waiting. Her handwriting filled the pages, fragments of days, the small joys, the sudden blanks. There were notes to herself, reminders, call mom, bring umbrella, and then a page where she had written, large and furious and tender, you're a grown man. Make your own dinner. I read it as if it were a map. The sentence was not a dismissal but a plea. Make your life something you can keep warm without me. Make yourself full even if I am not the person I was. It felt like both a wound and an offering. And in the bottom corner of the page she had written, in a smaller, steadier script, if you stay, stay for me. If you leave, leave with grace. I sat with the journal until the pale outside light hardened into morning. The pages smelled faintly of her perfume and damp paper and the city. I realized then that the discovery of infidelity had been only the beginning of an altogether different unraveling, one that asked more of me than anger ever could. It asked for a choice no marriage license prepares you for, to forgive without forgetting, to stay with the person you love and the person she might become, or to walk away carrying both the weight of what was and the sorrow of the what if. I closed the book and felt something like a decision making itself in my bones. The thing about betrayal is that it forces you to see what you have not seen and decide whether love is a record to be preserved or a living thing that can be rewritten. Outside, the morning folded itself open in ordinary, relentless light. I made coffee. I set the table for one and then for two. I waited. I set the table with 2 plates because that was the part of ritual I could still hold on to, the symmetry of forks, the measured clink as cups found saucers. The kettle hissed like a small animal. The apartment smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner, ordinary things that tethered mornings to reason. I waited, watching the door, waiting for her footsteps to make the same old music on the hallway carpet. When she came in it was later than she said. She moved slowly, carrying a bag that slumped at her hip. The light caught at her hair and broke it into a dozen colors. She sat without looking at me, as if she was choosing whether to make herself small or large in one motion. The idea of leaving, of packing her coat and walking out and locking the door behind her, had pressed itself into my thinking and refused to be shrugged off. Her face was soft with something like exhaustion and resolve. You can stop pretending the plate is an indictment, she said. Her voice did not have the flatness of malice. It had the tired softness of someone who had spoken hard truths too many times. I wanted to say that I had seen the receipts, the hotel keycard, the locked texts. I wanted to put the evidence on the table and ask for a verdict. Instead I let my mouth make small shapes. Tell me the truth, I said. All of it. She folded her hands in front of her like someone holding a fragile bird. Mark isn't, she stopped, searching for the thinest possible word that might keep the shape of the truth intact. Mark isn't what you think. I had rehearsed the accusations in my head so many times that when she spoke a different sentence I felt both cheated and oddly relieved. Then tell me what he is, I said. He's a photographer, she said. He photographs memory. The words hit me like rain. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw something. A photographer. I repeated. It sounded like a child's answer to an adult puzzle. She nodded. He used to do documentary work in hospitals and old neighborhoods. He started helping with memory projects, people who've lost names, faces, who can't link yesterday to today. He recreates fragments. He builds things people can touch and say, yes, you were here. You are still here. The explanation came out like someone giving directions through a minefield, careful to note where the ground might give way. She told me how Mark had begun as a neighbor who dropped off photographs, prints of the river where we'd once walked, the cafe we'd loved. He would stay and talk about light and the way it remembered edges. When the forgetfulness began, when she started misplacing more than keys, he offered to help. Not as a lover, but as a collaborator in memory, a person who could make anchors out of small things. He staged things, she said. He would arrange a dinner at a hotel, photograph it, write a note, then leave the receipt where we could find it. He told stories about old songs. He brought prints and made us sit with them. It sounds ridiculous, arrogant even. But when you can't hold a day in your hands, Sometimes you need someone to press one into your palm. I remembered the hotel keycard, the wine receipt, the lipstick smeared across a plate, and she watched my face with the calm of someone who had decided that the truth would have to be stranger than the lie. He was trying to make memory for us, she said. To give us things that would not disappear. For a moment the room tilted and then came upright. The pieces I'd been assembling, the small betrayals, the secret receipts, rearranged themselves into another pattern. The affair I had constructed in my head collapsed into a different architecture. Not a lover's betrayal but a kind of sacrament, a set of staged reliquaries meant to inscribe our life onto objects that did not forget. You set me up? I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was warm and slightly damp. We set you up, she corrected. You and me. The grief in her eyes was immediate and sharp. I didn't know how to explain the forgetting to you without sounding frantic. I thought if we could make new things, things you could point to and believe, maybe we could hold on to ourselves. He was the best at it. There was humility in the way she said his name, like someone admitting to using a rope in a storm. But the more we staged, she said, and there was a tremor in her voice, the more I felt alive. Remembered. It's possible to crave what remembers you. I was lonely in my forgetting. He remembered me the way I remembered being 23. I would be dishonest if I said there weren't moments when that felt like something I needed. The rest of the night slackened into slow confessions and small resistances. She told me about the hotel breakfast she'd shared with Mark, nothing intimate in the way we think of it, she insisted, but personal conversations about songs and photo negatives and the names of streets. She showed me photographs, a hand on a railing, the corner of a cafe table, the city through Rain Street glass. At first they were proof of a kindness. Then, somewhere between the fourth and fifth image, something inside me hardened. The pictures were soft. The moments they captured were private. I had been kept out of debates about how we would live the rest of our days. When she left the room to get a box of negatives from her coat, I found, tucked in the back pocket, a letter folded into thirds. My name was across the top in her hand. My heart hammered with the certainty of the final page of a play. I unfolded it with fingers that no longer obeyed me. If you read this because I can't tell you in the dark, she had written, know that I am afraid of two things, being lost and losing you. Mark helped me make something I could hold when the world stopped making sense. It wasn't meant to be kept from you. It was meant to keep us both. Underneath she had written in a pencil darker and more decisive, forgive me the secrecy. I did not trust my words to be steady enough. If you can, stay. If you cannot, leave with good grace. Love is not a contract, it is a choice. Choose bravely. I sat in the kitchen and held the letter until my thumb went numb. The rage I'd rehearsed dissolved into a saline ache that washed through my chest. There was still betrayal there, the breach of consent, the private theatre of secrets. But it was threaded with an improbable tenderness, a woman trying to build a landing place for herself and the man she loved when the land she stood on kept shifting. We could have told you, she said when she returned, her eyes blown wide like someone pleading for daylight. We should have. I was cowardly. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was protecting us. Protecting me from what? I asked. From the truth. From pain. From panic, she said simply. From watching you look at me and see the person I was and not the person I am. From making you an unwilling witness to my unraveling. The next weeks were strange. We walked like people who had been catapulted into a new geography and were learning to navigate a city by different street signs. Sometimes the photographs helped. At other times they were reminders of what we were losing, images that recorded what the mind refused to. We went to doctors. We sat through tests that returned equivocal answers, probable here, possible there. A phrase floated in the reports, early onset cognitive impairment, a label that sounded like something stitched in a factory, blunt and anonymous. The specialists advised what specialists always advise: monitor, document, structure. Mark came less and less. He left behind a packet of prints, binding them with a string and writing in the margin of one, if you forget, remember the light. His gesture was odd and perfect. It felt like a benediction and an admission. One evening, months after the first plate dropped, I found another note folded inside her sweater. This one was not to me. It was addressed to Mark. Her handwriting, wavering, smaller, spoke in fragments. I need more than a photograph. I need to remember what it felt like to be remembered. I do not want to lose him. I am afraid. There was a line under it, not her hand but another's, a different tilt. Bring him back to you. Let him see you choose. That was the last piece, the one that cut the cleanest. She had used Mark not only to preserve memory but also to test whether I could love the woman I would become. She had wanted to see if I would choose her when the background had been erased and only the act of choosing remained. It is easy, in the headlong anger of betrayal, to ask for explanation like a hammer asking for nails. The harder work is to listen to the motive, to see the fear behind the action, to weigh the love that made someone cross the boundary instead of call out for help. I chose then, in a way I had not known I had to stay. Not out of martyrdom, not out of pity, but because I could imagine a future where the ledger of us was rewritten. Love, I realized, is not only a record of what was but also a labor of what will be. It requires not only memory but courage. The twist that came later was quieter than any suspicion I had built. One weekday morning she woke and, perhaps for the first time in months, remembered a complete day. She could recite the name of a childhood pet, the smell of her father's garage, the melody of a song from college. We laughed then in a way that felt like survival. It was not a recovery. It was a rare tide. It came and went, as tides do, and left us with the knowledge that life would be scored by these small miracles and the long, inevitable fades. Months after that, in a folder of Mark's things he had left when he finally moved away to another project, I found a single envelope addressed to me. Inside was a print, a photograph of my wife and me, taken from behind in a hotel that I recognized only because of the chipped lamp. We were holding hands, our fingers were knotted together like two ropes. On the back he had written, in careful script, "He remembers her back when she remembers less." It is not betrayal. It is rescue by whatever means necessary. I cried then. Not because I had been the victim of a lie, but because I had been spared the worst lie, that memory equals love. It does not. Memory is a tool. Love is what we do with it. The plate under the table had been a small truth. The journal was a map. The staged dinners and receipts were crude anchors, and through them she had tried to tether us both. There are no clean endings in this kind of story. Sometimes you forgive. Sometimes you leave. Sometimes you both choose, day after exhausted day, to keep making meals for two and sometimes only for one. The last paragraph in her journal, the one I keep folded in my wallet now, begins, "You're a grown man. Make your own dinner." It ends with a sentence she had written later, after a day of good memory when the light had seemed to say yes, "Make it for me sometimes anyway. Bring me a plate and sit with me. Remember for me when I cannot. That is all I ask. I do. I make dinner. I set 2 plates. Sometimes she eats. Sometimes she forgets the meal was ever made. Sometimes the spoon falls from her hand and she looks at me with a child's bewilderment. I tell her the story of our life in fragments, like someone reading the back of a photograph aloud. She smiles when she remembers the punchline. She forgives me, and I forgive her. And in the corners of our apartment, in the scattered photographs and the brittle receipts and the lipstick scars on a plate, there is a complicated, stubborn tenderness that will not be simplified into villain and victim. The real betrayal, I learned, was not the clandestine warmth of another's attention. It was the belief that love could be kept safe from the erosion of time. The real rescue was the courage to make new proofs of affection in whatever fragile form they could be held, and to accept that sometimes the only way to keep someone is to allow them the small rebellions that make them feel seen. When she asks me now, on a bad day, if I resent the dinners Mark staged or the secrets they seeded, I tell her the truth. Sometimes, I say. But I loved you before the photographs and I love you without them. That will have to be enough. She reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. Then make the rice, she says, with a stubborn glint I used to know. And do not burn it this time. I laugh. The sound comes out raw and honest. Outside, the city keeps moving, indifferent and exact. Inside, for tonight, I feed 2 plates and we sit with them and with each other, and the world, for a while, at least, remembers us back.